Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm Chris Fenwick, head of the ESG Center of Excellence for OneTrust, and I'm here to speak with you very briefly on preparing for the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. In the next 20 minutes, I hope to simply offer you some fresh insights into how your company might prepare to meet the expectations of this new rule. So what is it? Very briefly, just to be complete and thorough, it's a new EU rule requiring affected companies operating in the EU disclose key information on ESG topics in their annual financial reports, which is, of course, a very key distinction. It replaces the existing requirements of the Non-Financial Reporting Directive and is part of the EU's Action Plan on Sustainable Finance and the EU Green Deal. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but just briefly, for those that aren't aware of the applicability, it applies to large EU companies meeting two of the three criteria here, those first three bullet points, as well as, or in addition to, listed EU companies on a regulated market, including small and medium enterprises. It also impacts non-EU companies as well. So those operating in the EU but based internationally with a turnover greater than 150 million in the EU and with a listed subsidiary or branch in the EU at 40 million euros. And the timeline for implementation is progressive. For those already subject to NFRD, you must report in 2025 for the 2024 reporting year. For those large companies we just mentioned, you must report in 2026 for the 2025 reporting year. And for those small and medium enterprises, you must report in 2027 for the 2026 reporting year. And non-EU companies will be subject to reporting in 2029 for the 2028 reporting year. And when we step back and look at the background on CSRD, you will find that the intent of the rule is to create an investor-focused ESG disclosure regime that is aligned with the multi-stakeholder engagement approach, modeled under stakeholder capitalism. It affirms what has widely been recognized by corporates, investors, and the like, that the path to a just and sustainable economic system will be directed through the financial markets. And organizations that are able to harness the value in their ESG transition will outcompete those that fail to do so. When you focus on the EU, the idea is that in order to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, the EU must shift capital flows towards sustainable investment, and to enable that transition, rules must be put in place to clarify and standardize what is considered sustainable and how sustainability information is reported. The EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance and the EU Green Deal and similar proposed legislation in other jurisdictions seeks to establish regulatory disclosure regimes that will meet the needs of private investment in understanding the true nature of an investment's sustainability impacts and its alignment with a just and sustainable economic transition, all within a standardized and comparable framework. And now that we have standards through which we may disclose our ESG data, we need to focus on understanding what ESG topics are relevant to our organization, what to prioritize, and what to measure, and what's important to our stakeholders. So one of the questions we most often get asked is, how will this align with what I'm already doing? And the short answer is somewhat. Many companies have already established voluntary reporting practices on ESG data, but will now be subject to CSRD as well. The good news is that the CSRD was developed to be aligned with existing reporting standards such as TCFD and GRI, and all recommend adherence to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for carbon accounting. But looking at the standard itself, which we'll jump into briefly, it does represent a shift in format. Nevertheless, if you're already reporting against these other frameworks, you've got a great head start in data collection and hopefully ESG integration within your business. And with the regulation comes some additional requirements that may be new for some under the voluntary regimes. Disclosures must now be integrated with financial reporting, which marks a significant shift in what many organizations are used to, especially in regard to the expected rigor of the data and the timing of reporting, which naturally will be shifted forward to when financial reports are disclosed. They must also be machine readable, which requires special formatting. They must address a double materiality perspective. They will require third-party assurance, limited assurance at first, with the expected evolution to reasonable assurance. You will be subject to climate risk assessment, potentially, in alignment with the recommendations of the TCFD, among other things. But I think these were some key points. So as we talk through getting prepared, we've already begun to establish our regulatory applicability. Next, it comes to communicating to leadership and building support for your disclosure program. Now, compliance is always a strong motivator. However, in this case, compliance doesn't necessarily require meaningful action on these ESG issues. Remember, this is a disclosure-based regulatory regime. However, but it does represent an opportunity to engage on ESG issues within a framework that provides some clarity in a way that will be meaningful to your stakeholders. Charter a working group to help you. We'll come back to this, but it's very important that for your program to be truly integrated, you've got to build an internal network of collaborators to help make it happen. Next, establish materiality, which understanding your frameworks, both your voluntary and your regulatory frameworks, will help you do, especially in standardizing a topic list to choose from for your materiality assessments. Prioritize your initiatives based on the output of your materiality assessments. And the last 5 are about understanding what to measure, who is responsible for performance and monitoring of these metrics, setting impactful objectives, and ultimately reporting out in whatever format is appropriate. And specifically, how technology is ultimately critical to a successful program. But stepping back into our regulatory applicability for a sec, we're actually, what are we actually reporting under CSRD? There are 2 general or cross-cutting standards and 10 topical standards under the categories of environment, social, and governance. Entity-specific disclosures will be required if determined to be material and aren't addressed under any of these topical standards. Sector-specific standards, like what you may be familiar with under SASB, are also in development. Note that following the comment period on these standards, the Commission agreed to phase in some reporting standards over time to allow companies to build capacity to report this information. And remember that a double materiality lens for identification of reporting requirements is required by explicit direction and under the expectations of the materiality assessment requirements in the standards. So what's it look like? Very quickly, for those who have not actually looked at the ESRS just yet, here you can see the section for climate change mitigation. The requirement is the undertaking shall disclose its transition plan for climate change mitigation. 14 is essentially context. What's the purpose of the objective of this disclosure? And then you have 15, A, B, C, D, and E, all providing discrete metrics that support the disclosure of 13. And here on the right, we can see the recommendations on how it's actually supposed to be presented in your financial report. This is not mandatory, but it does present a very specific way that you can go about disclosing for each section, general, environmental, social, and governance, and all the material information that should be included. So I did want to share that with you. For those of you who don't know, this is Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, widely revered as a champion of sustainable business. He helped to transform Unilever into the sustainable collection of brands it is today, and demonstrated how sustainability principles can contribute to and are essential to long-term business success. So to be a good business person, you need to know as much in in the future about sustainability as you know about sales. You need to know as much about climate change as you do about cash flow. You need to know as much about international development as you do about business development. This is the leader who challenged the convention of quarterly financial reporting and shifted Unilever to annual reporting to reinforce the idea of long-term thinking and to limit the counterproductive influences of quarterly earnings reports. And to be sure, his position on sustainability is clear. We cannot choose between growth and sustainability. We must have both. And my belief is that what bridges the gap between sustainability and sustained growth is investment in technology and the transition of financial support to sustainable enterprises, exactly what the Green Deal and the sustainable finance transition are trying to accomplish. Now, we don't all have a Paul Pullman as a senior leader. However, I share the anecdote to reinforce the need for leadership support to be successful in your endeavors. Without it, the likelihood that competing priorities may depress your program's ambitions is high. Leadership support with the aid of structured incentives and accountabilities will only serve to strengthen commitment throughout the organization and ensure your ESG programming becomes truly integrated. CSRD has established double materiality as the standard for determining which topics require reporting. It's a bidirectional approach to understanding impact. The impact of ESG issues on the company's financial performance and the impact of the company on the environment and society. Engagement with stakeholders helps us to understand what issues are important to them and which ultimately become important to us. This includes engaging employees through surveys, understanding the physical impacts of your operations within their communities, benchmarking material topics against peers and competitors through research or ideally through direct engagement, and engaging investors and senior leaders on key sustainability issues for them as well. The topic list you can see here on the right will be informed in this case by the topics list in the ESRS or any of the other reporting frameworks you might be reporting against. And they influence how your matrix is developed through assessment and prioritization. So once you've collected all the stakeholder information and have understood the relative impact on your company value, as well as your external impacts, you can establish your matrix or list of prioritized topics. It doesn't have to be a matrix. With your topics understood, you will also have an understanding of what metrics are required to meet your reporting obligations under CSRD, in addition to any other frameworks. And for your program to truly be effective, it must be integrated throughout all the functional areas that can have an impact on performance. Here we have an example of an ESG working group modeled off of the one that we've been developing at OneTrust, led by an overall executive sponsor, someone on your executive team who will champion the program at that level. It may even be the CEO, followed by an ESG or sustainability lead or chair of the working group. At that same level is someone in finance who is ultimately responsible for the output of this information under CSRD. Again, remember, it's going in the financial report. So you want to make sure they're included in the process. And then below that, we have a layer of functional leads that will have responsibility for data collection, monitoring, and performance against ESG metrics. They will also play a key role in establishing the objectives and targets for their org's topics. It's vitally important to be fully engaged on this issue and to allow for all affected orgs to have their voice in their ESG program. Below the functional leads are the specific data objectives and metrics owners, with the idea that ownership should fall as close to the responsible person as possible to drive efficient accountability for reporting and performance. And lastly, we have the voice of the employees, whose support will be critical to ensuring the culture of sustainability thrives in your organization. The nature of CSRD reporting and other non-financial reporting requirements developing in other jurisdictions is elevating the need for greater rigor and control for ESG data. Excel and other tools simply don't have the capacity to meet the need for better collection, analysis, and sharing of decision-useful information amongst stakeholders. Tools are an imperative to help you collect information efficiently through automation, deliver accurate and assurable reports, and most importantly, to prioritize and monitor the actions needed to achieve your ESG and sustainability ambitions. An automated tool should be cloud-based with embedded controls for security and privacy, allow for various methods of data discovery and capture, and enable you to streamline your reporting against multiple frameworks with auto-populating reports. Your tool should enable accuracy and audit readiness. It should centralize your data into a single source of truth with the supporting calculations, methodologies, and other evidence readily available for validation. And it should integrate with your tech stack. ESG spans across multiple functional areas and systems, all of which should allow direct transfer of information, removing the opportunity for user error. And more than anything, your tool should be actionable, providing the capabilities for reporting and analysis, delivering insights and recommendations, and accountability for action through tasks and workflows. This is a critical factor in taking your CSRD-aligned program from one influenced by disclosure to one driven by action. Please don't hesitate to visit our booth to see how OneTrust program reporting and disclosures tool can help you operationalize your ESG and sustainability programs. I want to leave you with some closing thoughts. ESG is a data set. It is sustainability-related data contextualized for reporting to financial and other stakeholders. ESG data feeds your disclosures, and sustainability programs feed your ESG data. CEO and board support is critical. When push comes to shove, they have the last decision in your ESG programs. Get them on board early. You can't do your materiality assessment in a vacuum. You have to go through the process of stakeholder engagement, doing the research. If you don't do so, your materiality assessment won't meet the expectations of CSRD, but ultimately it won't be perceived as credible. You can't do it all by yourself. You've got to build a team. Your ESG program has to build roots, and they have to reach to the people that already have ownership of the programs and topics from which you must disclose. Harness the value in addressing material ESG issues. As you go through your materiality assessment, you will see opportunities there to strengthen customer relationships, to enter into new product areas. There is value in driving your ESG program. Even if you don't meet the quantitative thresholds of CSRD, you likely won't escape the impacts. The downstream impacts of CSRD will reach you eventually. Don't let the CSRD be the only way you tell your story. Remember, it's focused on investors, though it does have a double materiality perspective. Don't limit your disclosures just to the CSRD. Tell your story the way your stakeholders outside of your investors want to see your story told, and that's your company, and in the way that your company tells its stories. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. There's value in the journey. Nobody is expecting anyone to be ready to go at the front of the gate. Tell your story as you're going. It builds trust with your customers. And technology is key to ensuring consistent data collection, accountability, monitoring, and reporting. And now that these reports are going in your financial statements, that rigor is necessary. Thank you for your time.